What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? In this series, I'm sharing some of the craziest ones I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff, so follow along. So in 2004, Geraldine Kelly was dying of cancer. Her daughter was there by her side, but this was particularly hard on her daughter, because her father, Geraldine's husband, had passed away in a motor vehicle accident years prior. Or at least that's what Geraldine had told everyone. A few days before Geraldine passed away, she tells her daughter that she lied about how her husband died. He didn't die in an accident. Geraldine had killed him. And not only that, but she was keeping his body in a freezer in a storage unit. So her daughter calls the police right away, and sure enough, he's in an unplugged freezer that was taped shut. Geraldine claimed that she had been a victim of abuse, but she passed away a few days later along with any information she had on this case. This is why you have to be careful in national parks. So in 2016, a man completely dissolved in a hot spring in Yellowstone. A lot of people don't realize these hot springs are near boiling temperatures, and a lot of them are severely acidic. And falling in happens more than we realize. It terrifies me so much that I made an entire podcast episode about it that's going up tonight. So it's believed that a 23-year-old man and his sister went into Yellowstone to go hot potting, which is when people secretly hang out in the cooler hot springs. It's like really not allowed in the park. His sister was filming him as he went over to one of the hot springs to reach down and touch it to test the temperature, and that's when he tumbled forward and fell in. A rescue team was able to get there, and they saw his body floating in the pool because a fall like that kills you immediately. But a thunderstorm was coming in, so they were gonna have to wait a while to get him out. And by the time they got there, there was nothing left. And unfortunately, this does happen more than we realize. Check out tonight's episode if you're interested in hearing more.
3 urban legends that turned out to be true. Number 1. In the 1980s, parents in Long Island terrified their children with the legend of Cropsey. He was a murderous man who lived beneath an abandoned school and would capture children. But it was later found that the old janitor of the school was still living on school grounds, and it's believed he was responsible for the disappearance of several kids, which made the legend of Cropsey true. Number 2. Charlie No Face was the terrifying legend of a featureless man who would roam the streets of Pittsburgh at night. But it was discovered that this man did exist. His name was Raymond Robinson. He was a very nice guy, and he only left his house at night as he feared his deformity would scare people. Number 3. Legend has it that an escaped asylum patient roams near the Fairfax County Bridge, where countless amounts of dead rabbits have been found. There wasn't any legitimacy to this legend until a couple drove through this bridge in the 1970s, only to find a man dressed as a bunny who threw an axe through their windshield before they got away.
Most terrifying prisoners of all time. Known as one of Australia's most dangerous and violent female prisoners, this is Rebecca Butterfield. She was initially sent to Silverwater Prison for stabbing her neighbor, and that is where things got worse. Way worse. She has cut her own throat, bashed her head against a wall 105 times, and stabbed her friend, who was also a fellow inmate, 33 times with a carving knife. The prison murder landed her another 12 years, and another 5 was added on as she was deemed too dangerous for society. During one violent episode, she said, "If I get out, I will kill again." Butterfield has attacked prison nurses and doctors, throwing boiling tea and water on guards and other inmates, and even lunged towards guards, saying she was trying to take their guns. As of January 2021, she is to remain behind bars until 2023. Most terrifying prisoners of all time. This is Jamie Osuna, the man with 1,000 faces. In 2017, Jamie was sentenced to life in prison for the 2011 murder and torture of a woman from Bakersfield. During his court case, you can see him smirking, rolling his eyes, and mocking the family of the deceased, even giving a thumbs up as the judge announces his sentence. From there, he is transported to Corcoran State Prison, where things got worse. Way worse. He is given a cellmate, Luis Romero, who had spent more than 2 decades in prison himself. On March 9th, 2019, guards checked their cell and find the most gruesome scene. Romero had been beheaded, and several of his body parts were removed and fashioned into a necklace worn by Jamie. "Ha ha ha" had been written on the wall in blood, as well as "The Man with 1,000 Faces."
This old lady killed so many people. Baba Anushka, she loved chemistry. And when her husband died, she was like, I'm gonna make the house into a laboratory and sell potions. So a bunch of girls came to her and they were like, we don't want our husbands to go to war. And she was like, I can make them really, really sick so they don't have to. And they were like, yeah, do that. So she started getting really, really popular. But then all the girls were like, we actually don't like our husbands. Can you do a little more? And Baba Anushka was like, yeah, I can kill them. So then all the girls were like, oh, we like this. So Baba Anushka made these deadly potions, gave them to the girls gave them to their abusive husbands, and they were dead in like 8 days. And Baba Anushka would do this thing where she'd ask the girls, how heavy is the problem? Which was code for, how heavy is your husband? Because I gotta make sure I put enough in it, mama. She was so successful that she hired a sales agent to go into town and like sniff out people with marital problems. But this one girl fucked it all up. After she killed her shitty husband, she used another potion to kill her new husband's rich uncle. And the police were like, can you explain this? And she was like, it was Baba Anushka. Baba Anushka was like, are you fucking kidding me? But she ended up getting out of jail and then living to 100.
Most terrifying prisoners of all time. This is Andre Thomas, the inmate who ate his own eyeball. Andre greatly differs from the other prisoners that have been in this series because his violence has been towards himself and not other inmates. He was put on death row for murdering his wife, son, and stepdaughter in 2004, removing the hearts of 2 of his victims, putting them in his pockets, and then taking them home and throwing them away. For those brutal murders, he turned himself in and told police that he killed each victim with a separate knife because he believed there was demons inside of them. If the demon's blood was allowed to mix, they might survive. After only 5 days in jail, Andre removed one of his own eyes with his bare hands. After being convicted and placed on death row, he removed his remaining eye and ate it. He was then sent to a psychiatric facility and has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has suffered mental illness his entire life. His case has sparked great debate as whether or not we should execute the mentally ill.
So I always thought no one ever dies at Disney. Like, even if something horrible happens, they get the person off the park so they can always say that no one's ever died there. But then I found out not only is that not true, but a law firm has compiled all of the incidents. I'm going to share a few of them with you, but if you're interested in stories like this, make sure you follow the podcast because tonight's episode's just going to be these stories. So 2 of the park's worst accidents have both happened on the Matterhorn ride. One of them being a woman named Dolly, who in 1984 fell off of one of the back of the sleds onto the rails. At the time, these gondolas used to go into the rides, and so there was actually a family that watched her fall off onto the track. And so the family also saw as there was another car racing towards Dolly. The dad actually screamed at his daughters to cover their eyes, which was for the best because Dolly got hit hard. She got hit so hard that when EMTs arrived on the scene and were going up into the ride, there were park attendants coming down telling them not to look. And so finally, when someone was looking at the car she was in, they noticed that her seatbelt was unbuckled. But it's never been confirmed if she unbuckled her seatbelt herself or if an attendant didn't check her seatbelt well enough and it was never buckled in the first place.
Please, please, please. Oh, fuck. No.
This is why I don't camp. So my grandfather lived through this exact same Blair Witch style scenario as a kid, and the story he told me was crazy. He grew up in this really small Appalachian town, and there was a giant forest behind his house. And he and his cousin used to go all throughout the area to hunt raccoons. And I talk about it on this episode of the podcast, but every time he would go to the edge of the woods, he would hear a woman scream. Just like this one here, like a guttural scream.
Oh, fuck.
It was like someone didn't want him to go into the woods. But unlike the guys in that video, a few years go by and my grandfather actually figured out what it was. So he had this old creepy neighbor who had actually tied a string to a bucket in the woods. And whenever he saw kids coming close to the woods, he would play it with a bow like a violin, and it sounded like a woman screaming. But the reason he was doing this was because there were moonshiners in the woods illegally hiding out and making moonshine. And this neighbor knew that if the kids accidentally stumbled upon the illegal operation, those moonshiners were not going to spare those kids. So yeah, if you hear something in the woods, no you didn't. And check out the podcast for more scary stories. What are some of the craziest things that people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm going to show you some of the wildest stories I found. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. So this story comes from a woman who was helping her mother at the end of her mother's life. The woman actually lived in Europe, but her mom lived in China, so when she got the call that her mother wasn't doing very well, she made the long journey all the way back. And right when she gets there, her mother asks all the doctors and nurses to leave the room. She apparently wanted to be absolutely alone with her daughter. So the daughter's like, "What's up? Are you okay?" And the mom tells her she knows she doesn't have a lot of time left, so there's something she really wants to tell her. Her mother proceeds to tell her that she's not actually her biological mother. And obviously this comes as like a huge shock to the daughter, but it's nothing compared to what came next. The mother proceeds to tell her that when she was younger, she really wanted to have her own kids, but unfortunately she just wasn't able to get pregnant. And not only that, but she didn't have a lot of money, so going through an adoption agency wasn't necessarily an option. So she actually bought the daughter off the black market for adopted children in China. Meaning she didn't know if the daughter's adopted parents gave her up willingly or if someone had taken her to put her on the black market. The mother actually passed away just shortly after that, and we haven't gotten any update from the poster if she got any more information on her biological family.
Let me tell you about the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I usually experience a lot of sleep paralysis. But in this story, I know for a fact I was awake. I was up watching the BBMAs at 3 a.m. And usually my bed was facing the balcony door. And next to the balcony door, there's the door of my room and the bathroom. Back then, I used to sleep with my bathroom door open and the lights on. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, my bathroom door slams shut. As loud as I've ever heard it. And I was living in a desert country, so there was no wind for it to slam shut. So I sat up, trying to process what had happened, and then all of a sudden, my closet door busts open. I start looking at them both, and I think, I don't want to anger whatever's in my room right now, or whatever's causing this, whether it's a jinn, or an entity, or a ghost, or whatever it was. So I start reciting Quran in my brain, just so for everything to calm down. And 10 to 15 minutes later, my closet door closes up, and my bathroom door that's slammed shut so you need to pull the handle opens up on its own. I got up to check what was happening. Biggest mistake, never do that, by the way. And I saw that on my bedroom door that's facing the bathroom, there was a carved smiley face. After that, I shifted everything in my room. I no longer slept facing the door. And I wrote Quran verses on the inside of my closet.
Okay, so remember that story of the adult woman posing as a child to murder her adoptive family? Well, Investigation Discovery just made a documentary about the whole event, and it is shocking. I think the biggest takeaway is that Natalia wasn't some evil mastermind. She was being severely abused by the Barnett family. And there's one scene in the documentary that just really stands out to me. So the Barnetts had Natalia aged up 14 years to 22 years old so they could put her in this apartment that was definitely not ADA compliant. And the mom, Christine, would drive her Cadillac up to this low-income apartment, drop off the groceries that she bought for her, and would make Natalia carry them inside. She wouldn't even get out of the car to help. So this video was taken by Michael, the dad, and one day he comes into the apartment and sees that Natalia has donuts. And he starts losing his mind. He's like, who brought you these donuts? We didn't buy you donuts. You always lie to us. You never tell us the truth. Tell me who got you these donuts right now. And while she's getting yelled at, she looks terrified, as if disobeying the Barnetts was the worst thing she could do. Even though at this point they're saying she's 22 years old and living on her own, just leave her be. It turns out that Michael knew that Child Protective Services had been called to Natalia's apartment because the neighbors noticed that she was not being taken care of. But why are you worried about CPS, Michael, if you're not doing anything wrong and she's not a child? Another really sad takeaway from the documentary is that Michael's child, Jacob, who was this wonderkind who got his PhD at 14 years old, was so traumatized by the whole event of his parents neglecting and abusing Natalia that he now just lives in his dad's basement and is not really putting all of his genius to use. I could go on for much longer about this documentary, but let me know if you watched it and what you thought.
Oh my god, I'm sorry. I found this bone, and it looks like a hip bone of a human, and it looks like it's been cut off. You can leave. And that looks like the bit that you put a leg into. I'm about to have a f***ing heart attack. This is where I am. I'm in the middle of the woods. I'm on this bit that isn't even really a track at all. There's trees covering it. It could be an animal's, but I don't know. So I'm gonna call the police, I think. I'm literally waiting for the police to arrive, and I have 7% battery, and my car's not working. After an hour, the police arrived, and I then walked him through the woods. It's a 15-minute walk to get to where I was, with the moonlight, and that was it. I did it all a bit quicker earlier, and I think it's because I was scared. It was just slightly to the side. I didn't really move it.
Lovely.
So despite me sending photos, they needed to come and take more with a tape measure to figure out what it was, because they knew it wasn't deer.
Are you coming back, no? Or are you sitting here?
I'm here.
You're going to stay here?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. That's all golden. Thank you very much.
Oh, and I'll leave you? Okay. Wow, okay. Is this better than drunk people, or?
It's a little bit sketchy.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
The police officer had to wait on the scene and tape it up in case, and I had to make the journey through the woods back to my car all alone, which was kind of scary. So I haven't posted an update till now because I didn't want to post until I knew what it was. I didn't want to post a human remain on TikTok, you know? The police never got back to me, so I don't think it was human. And I posted on Reddit and somebody said pig, which makes sense because like pigs and humans get confused all the time. So let's hope it's that, and let's hope I never go walking in the woods again.
This is the father-daughter incest case that turned into a murder. You guys, this one is disgusting, and if I had to hear it, then so do you. Hi, I'm Julie. I talk about true crime, dark history, and all things weird and spooky, so if that's what you're into, please give me a follow and also follow my Instagram. Okay, so you're gonna need a backstory. In 1995, when Stephen Plattle was 20 years old, he met and groomed 15-year-old Alyssa on the internet. He traveled to San Antonio, Texas to begin a sexual relationship with her. And then Alyssa ran away with Stephen to begin a life with him in New York. Alyssa is his first wife, by the way. Alyssa became pregnant at 16, and then they had their first baby when she turned 17 years old, and they named her Denise Plattle. According to Alyssa, Stephen inflicted torturous abuse on their daughter Denise. He pinched her and beat her till she was black and blue, and even tried to drown her multiple times. Alyssa decided to put Denise up for adoption because she didn't believe that Denise would have a chance at life if she lived with Stephen. Anthony and Kelly Fusco adopted Denise and renamed her Katie Rose Fusco. In August 2016, when Katie was 18 years old, she reached out to her biological parents Stephen and Alyssa Plattle on Facebook. They met in Knightdale, North Carolina, and Katie then decided to move in with Stephen and Alyssa and their 2 children. By the time Katie moved in, Stephen and Alyssa had actually agreed to separate, so they were sleeping in different bedrooms. Over the following months, Stephen and Katie became incredibly close. In May 2017, Alyssa read in one of her children's diaries that Katie and Stephen were involved in sexual activity and that Katie was pregnant. She read that her 2 children were told that Katie was their stepmother. Alyssa called Stephen immediately, and then he confirmed that this abusive, incestuous relationship was true and that she was actually pregnant. Alyssa then called the police, as she should. On July 20, 2017, Stephen and Katie got married and lied on their marriage documents saying that they weren't related. The wedding was attended by Stephen's mother and Katie's adoptive parents. It just baffles me that they attended this disgusting wedding. There is no way that these people didn't know that they were related. Katie gave birth to her own father's baby and named him Bennett Kieran Plattle in September 2017. In January 2018, Katie and Stephen were arrested for incest charges. The judge ordered that Katie and Stephen have no contact with each other and that Bennett would go into the custody of Stephen's mother. Following their release bond, Katie decided to move back in with her adoptive parents, and she told Stephen that she did not want to continue with this relationship. Sorry guys, come back for part 2 because I don't have the 10-minute feature.
This is considered one of the most shocking cases in Polish history. On January 6, 1999, a sailor in Poland noticed something strange floating on the river. It was long and pale and it smelled very bad. And as he leaned in closer to get a better look, he saw an ear attached to it. Now what I'm about to say next is very disturbing, so be warned. After the sailor found this substance, DNA testing then indicated it was the skin of a missing woman named Katarzyna Zawada. And whoever did this to her turned her skin into a suit and was likely wearing it. So at this point, only her skin was found. Until January 14th, when pieces of her clothing and one leg was found also in the river. 17 years later, 52-year-old Robert J. was arrested for this. He previously worked in a dissection lab, meaning he was skilled in preparing animal skin. And he allegedly also knew the victim. As of October 2022, 23 years since the victim was found, Robert J. is still awaiting trial. As he remains in custody, investigators are allegedly gathering more evidence to solve the case. Follow for more.
The Anthill Kids Cult Part 5. This is one of the most gruesome parts, so big trigger warning. Even if you can handle these type of topics, you might be very, very disturbed. Hi, I'm Julie and I talk about true crime, dark history, and all things spooky, so if you like that, please follow me. So after the freezing baby incident, the authorities came and raided the place again in 1985 and took away all 14 children, thank God. Of course, this didn't stop them from having babies, so every time that they had a new baby, the authorities would have to come in and take them away again. Once the children were all gone, things spiraled completely out of control. Many of the cult members tried to escape, but none were ever successful. One of the members that tried to escape was actually Rock's second wife, Giselle. It was actually Giselle's idea to leave the baby out in the cold, but despite that, really bad things happened to this woman on the commune. Rock found out that Giselle was trying to escape the commune and then threw a hunting knife at her, which landed in her thigh and created a 3-inch deep wound. Rock's response to this was to have a beer and then take a nap, and then hours later wanted to operate on her leg. It had been so long since her initial injury at this point that her leg began to clot and swell. Rock pressed on her wound until it opened back up again, and then he proceeded to pour boiling hot water in her wound repeatedly. And then he filled the wound up with salt and olive oil. Somehow Giselle survived this surgery. He also blowtorched one of his wife's stomach while she was pregnant. One of his favorite things to do was blowtorch people. He even blowtorched one of his wives on her back until the skin was bubbling up. A man named Claude who lived on the commune received horrific treatment as well. Rock poured boiling hot water on him, pulled out 11 of his teeth with a pair of pliers, broke each of his toes by hand, and then sliced his arm open with a piece of glass. He got one of his wives to break Claude's leg with a sledgehammer. Claude was ordered to walk around with an elastic band wrapped tightly around his testicles. He had to keep the elastic band on overnight, and then one of his testicles swelled up to the size of an orange. This caused irreparable damage. Then of course Rock decided to operate on him the next morning. He removed one of Claude's testicles and cauterized the wound with a hot iron. The next surgery Rock performed caused another death. This is the hardest one to hear. A woman named Solange started to complain of stomach pain. Rock of course concludes that the best thing to do is operate. He laid Solange on the table and punched her in the stomach. He then forced a tube into her rectum to perform an enema with molasses and olive oil. I don't know what his thing with olive oil is. I'm sorry guys, you're gonna have to come back for part 6. This is one of the most scariest things that could ever happen to a girl or a guy. Back when I was 19 years old, I didn't have a car. I shared it with my mom. She used to pick me up from work, drop me off. Sometimes I would take the car and do my errands, but we only had one car. So I used to work at a hospital, and one afternoon we didn't have a car. It was getting serviced, and she called me up and she said, "Hey, I'm gonna ask you to take the bus and meet me at the place where I'm at." Not gonna lie, I thought it was like a cool adventure because I was gonna be able to just get on a bus all by myself. And I didn't follow the instructions that she gave me. I went another way and I paid for it. So I was walking down a main street thinking that it was public, it was well lit, and that I was gonna be safe. Turns out that there was this car filled with guys speaking Spanish, and they just started flirting with me from the car and me on the sidewalk walking, asking me to get in their car. So I noticed that they go into like a street and they kind of make like a U-turn, park the car, some guys get out, they come back out in a different car. But I saw all of this because it was like an open angle from where I was at. This was happening, I was approaching a big building, probably about 3 or 4 stories high, and it was like an open apartment building. I did the only thing I thought I could do, run inside the building and start going up the stairs. I finally get to the 3rd floor. And I start knocking in a corner apartment, but quietly because I don't want them to know where I'm at. At the same time, I'm listening to them speaking in Spanish, one telling the other one, "I don't see her, I don't see her." All at the same time, I dialed 911. 911 did not pick up my phone call, literally. An operator came on and said, "Please hold, our lines are busy." All the while, I'm still looking for this bus to see if it just approaches me and I can freaking get the heck out of there. I start crying at this moment because I'm so scared, and I'm knocking on the door saying, "Please help me, please help me. There's somebody chasing me." And nobody opened the door. Why would they? Finally, the guys get in the car like, "Hey, let's bail." When I saw them leave, I quickly ran downstairs to the main street again because the bus stop was literally right in front of this building. Mind you, I'm still on the phone on hold for 911. Tell me how, next to this apartment building, out of nowhere, to my right, there was a German Shepherd growling at me. Finally, 911 picks up the phone. Panicking, this was my response. "The bus is not here yet. I was knocking on the door and nobody opened. And the guys were following me and they wanted to kidnap me. And now the dog is chasing me." Do you know how crazy I sounded? The bus came. The bus driver just looked at me and said, "Honey, take a seat."
What the fuck? Is this thing on?
The Anthill Kids Cult, Part 6. This is the final and most horrific part. Trigger warning times a billion. This will disturb anyone. I'm literally warning you now. Hi, I'm Julie and I talk about true crime, dark history, and all things spooky, so if you're into that, please follow me. So we were at the part about the molasses and olive oil enema. After this, Rock cut open her stomach and ripped out a piece of her intestines. He made another member of the cult stitch up Solange's stomach with a needle and thread. Solange didn't make it, and I'd honestly be surprised if she did. She was buried, and then Rock apparently started having dreams about her. This is where things get really bad. He believed that Solange was pregnant with his child. He made other members of the cult dig up her body, and then he had them perform a post-mortem marriage between him and Solange. He then told the rest of the group that he had the power of resurrection. He told them that he was going to bring Solange back from the dead. He cut open Solange's skull and did terrible things into her brain. He said the only way that he could resurrect her was to ejaculate into her brain. Once they realized she wasn't going to come back to life, they cremated her, and Rock put her ashes in a jar and did the same thing that he did with her brain to the jar. Before she was cremated, Rock even broke off one of her rib bones and wore it as a necklace. Sorry guys, I accidentally said that Gabrielle was Giselle in the last video, but this is Gabrielle. So Gabrielle went through very horrific things at her time in the commune. She suffered welding torch burns to her genitals. Rock stabbed her in the back with a hypodermic needle and just left it in her back. He cut off one of her fingers with a wire cutter. Gabrielle tried to escape and Rock found out, so he cut parts of her breast off. Gabrielle had a prolapsed uterus one time, and to cure it, Rock punched her uterus back into her body. He also tried to tie a string to her uterus and pull it out. When that didn't work, he made a wooden cone to use to plug everything up. Gabrielle managed to escape the commune and went to the hospital to get proper medical treatment, but then went back to the commune right after. One night when she was back, Rock grabbed her hand, stabbed it into the table, and just left her there for 45 minutes and went to get a beer. When he returned, he began to slowly cut her arm to the bone. He then grabbed a meat cleaver and chopped her arm right off. Apparently, she didn't make a single sound while this was happening. After this, Giselle managed to escape, and then she went to the hospital, and then they called the police. He was sentenced to life in prison after they found Solange's body buried on the commune. 3 of his wives stayed loyal to him while he was in prison, and he was allowed conjugal visits, which I don't get, because why would you stay loyal to that? Like, that's disgusting.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Let's talk about another South Asian serial killer who claimed a whopping 100 lives. Javed Iqbal was a Pakistani serial killer who confessed to the murder and sexual abuse of 100 boys ages ranging from 6 to 16. When his father died in 1993, Javed inherited 3 million rupees. He used the money to open different businesses designed to meet young boys and teenagers. He'd lure his victims by leaving money on the floor of his video game arcade. Whenever a child would pick up the money, he would accuse them of theft and take them to a room where he would sexually assault them as their punishment for stealing. Javed also met other victims through pen pal programs. He'd convince them to send photos of themselves, select his favorites, and then he'd send them gifts. After that, he'd arrange to meet them and sexually assault them. He'd abduct his victims, assault them, and then strangle them to death. He'd then dismember the corpses of his victims and submerge them in vats of hydrochloric acid. After the bodies liquefied, he'd dump everything into a nearby river. In 1998, Javed and an employee were robbed and beaten by another employee. He suffered a severe head injury and was hospitalized for 22 days. Right after that, he was arrested and charged with sexual assault. Somehow, he was granted bail and most of his property was sold to cover his medical care. He moved out to the slums of Lahore where he would commit more heinous crimes. In 1999, Javed wrote a letter to the police and a local Lahore newspaper where he confessed to the murder of 100 boys. When the police got to his home, they were met with bloodstains, vats of acid, acid containing partially dissolved bodies and plastic bags containing the clothes and shoes of his victims. Note cards with details and photos of his victims were also found, but Javed was gone. The police also found out he'd been sharing his home with 3 teenage boys who were believed to be his accomplices. On December 30th, 1999, Javed gave himself up. However, when it came time for him to stand trial, he denied any involvement in the killings. He claimed he confessed to the murders to draw attention to the dangers children living in poverty experience. Thankfully, the judge didn't believe him, and he was sentenced to death by strangulation in the same public square he frequented when searching for victims. His body was also to be cut into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid. His 3 accomplices were also found guilty. However, on October 8th, 2001, he and one of his accomplices were found dead in their cell. It seems like they had committed suicide. However, there's speculation that they were murdered because autopsies revealed that they were beaten prior to their death. Javed's motive for these murders was his rage over a perceived injustice committed by the Lahore police. They beat him after arresting him on charges of sexual assault against a young runaway boy in the 1990s. Since his mother was forced to watch his decline due to these injuries before suffering a fatal heart attack while he was still incarcerated, he vowed to make 100 mothers cry for their sons just as she had cried for him. Javed bragged to authorities that he could have easily killed 500 or more children. He stopped at 100 because that's what he promised himself